You could be the king of the world, and you are dependent on everyone around you to eat, to not be murdered by them. I mean, you are. I mean, it's amazing how precarious even a totalitarian regime is. I mean, the amazing thing is that these last at all, because in many cases it would just take 50 people to act in unison to kill the tyrant, right? But it never happens because you just have a first mover problem. Everyone is afraid to be the first person shot. But it is a genuine mystery that these systems even perpetuate themselves. And when they unravel, when you see, Gaddafi being murdered in a crowd, you realize, wow, it really is just a matter of the restraint and fear of human beings keeping any of these things together. A benign, if you wanted a hierarchy where you had a kind of benign philosopher king pulling the reins of a society, I'm not saying we do, but even there, you could have an ethical one. You could have one where, and a non-superstitious one where someone recognized, hey, this is how we're doing it, but we are at the top of this hierarchy, am radically dependent on being surrounded by as many happy people as possible.
Well, look, I mean, I don't, in some profound sense, I don't disagree with that.
We're actually, I mean, this sounds like a fiction, but we're living with this problem, and we encounter this more and more when you talk, in Silicon Valley, as you and I occasionally do, and I'm sure you do as well, where you meet people who are fantastically wealthy, who seem uncannily detached detached at the fact that there's this growing chasm between them and those they know and the rest of humanity, and one begins to wonder, what level of wealth inequality will everyone find alarming? And some people are acting as though there is no level that is alarming, that there's a kind of a law of nature that this thing can grow just impossibly to the point where we have trillionaires walking around and driving in their motorcades, and it's kind of it's sort of the libertarian religion one occasionally runs into, and clearly there's some level of inequality that's untenable, or at least would be undesirable. I mean,
well, it's a funny thing, because that's a place where our thought loops and then agrees to some degree again, because I do believe that you can, in some sense, rationally derive an ethic. So let's take the argument that you put forward and say that, well, and this is an extension of your well-being argument to some degree, which I've thought about a fair bit. It's like, well, okay, what's the optimal solution for you? Well, okay, well, first of all, there isn't just you now. There's you now, and you tomorrow, and you next week, and you in a year, you in 5 years. So there's you and the you that propagates across time. So one of the implications of that is that you can't do anything that's really good for the you now that isn't very good for you a week from now, right?
Yeah.
So that means you have to imagine yourself as multiple individuals across multiple time frames. And then you have to figure out what's good for all those individuals across all those time frames, although you discount the future to some degree because of its unpredictability. But then, so that's a very tight set of constraints. And you might say, well, a rational person would calculate what was optimal across all those multiple time frames. Then you do the same thing with other people, which is the point you just made. Well, it isn't just you, because who's you? There's you and your family. And most people are in a situation where they would regard damage to their family as perhaps even worse than damage to them. So whatever they are obviously encapsulates their family, and then to some degree that flows off into the community. And so there is no isolated you, and that's sort of your point with regards to the ethic. But then, so I agree with all that, but then one of the things that I would suggest is that, because that's an incredibly difficult rational calculation, and perhaps an impossible one, technically speaking, but certainly very difficult, that what has happened in part as our great narratives have emerged across time is that we have observed ourselves attempting to solve that multiple identity multiple time frame problem, and we've told stories about people who do that exceptionally well, and then we've winnowed out those stories and we've produced these powerful narratives that encapsulate the ethic that does in fact reflect that wisdom.
Yeah.
And and I think you actually accept some of that in your moral propositions, which is something that we've talked about before. So for example, although never really agreed on, you certainly believe, for example, that the embodiment of truth is one of the means whereby you solve the problem of ethics. And I would say that that's a deeply rooted Judeo-Christian concept, that
it's
the truth
it's so
above
deeply
all.
rooted that it precedes any notion of religious provincialism. I mean, it's deeper than Judeo-Christian. It's deeper than our humanity on some level. At one point, we talked about the golden rule, and I said that the precursor to the golden rule can be found even among monkeys, right?
Right,
so
right.
The golden rule is a
rats,
good rule
yes.
even for monkeys.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And so,
But let me just add to
Yeah,
the
yeah.
picture you sketched out. I completely agree with. We have an ethical obligation even to our future selves, right? I mean, we are in relationship to who's going to be the person who's drinking his fourth scotch tonight has some ethical relationship to the person who's going to wake up with a hangover tomorrow morning. And one thing we know for sure, in which we have begun to dimly understand and describe scientifically, is that we are bad at all of these calculations,
Yes.
right? Like the hyperbolic discounting of future rewards.
well, that's
and-
also why I think we have these stringent limitations on rationality, Sam, is that we can't solve the problem through calculation.
Well, no, but we increasingly can, and even where it's best summarized not by one thing I'll grant you is that it's not always best conveyed or rendered indelible and actionable by being given a nature paper or an abstract from a paper in the literature and being told this is the way you want to behave to maximize your well-being. It may best be conveyed by certain stories.